When many people first heard the idea to defund the police, they said, that's insane. But even among those people, they later thought, well, what would that look like, actually? And so I'm very surprised that the people who are pushing this policy have more attention on this policy than at any other time in my lifetime. But I'm still not seeing what it would actually look like articulated. And so that's what I'm here to do today. First, I am aware that there is an effort to say, no, we don't really mean defund the police, meaning we don't mean to abolish the police. What we really mean is reform. And so when I see something like this, I think it makes it pretty clear what the message from some people are. And this is a New York Times opinion piece where it says, yes, we mean literally abolish the police because reform won't happen. Also, if you saw the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, when in front of the mob, when the questioner says, we don't want any more police in our community, yes or no, do you commit to defunding the police? He says that he is not in favor of abolishing the police force, at which point the crowd goes nuts and they all chant for him to go home. This question is actually an economic question. Security is a service that we consume and that we collectively pay for. So let's take a dispassionate look at this. You might be surprised that this is not a new idea. Stripping the state of their security function is an idea that has been deeply considered for decades and even centuries. I'm going to use the term the state to just talk about the government as a whole, not really to make a distinction between the federal government and the state government. I will argue for this proposition as if I were on a debate stage and tasked with arguing that the police should be defunded. And then at the end, I'll give you my own opinion about it. I'm Ken Bauso. I do this podcast to discuss economic and finance issues that we encounter in our everyday lives in a way that can be followed by everyone, even if you're not a financial professional. I'm a financial advisor, so if you're interested in working together on your own portfolio, please contact me at ken@investhuckleberry.com. Belgian-born Gustav de Molinari was considered the first to champion the idea of separating the security service from the state. He wrote a book in 1849 titled The Production of Security. And I would start by saying this. This is a quote from his book. The interests of the consumer of any commodity whatsoever should always prevail over the interests of the producer. To repeat, the interest of the consumer of any commodity whatsoever should always prevail over the interest of the producer. So what's wrong with the idea that a community should get the product it wants? That's putting the interest of the consumer above the producer. It gets the product that the community wants at the best price. The security product the state offers might not be satisfactory for a couple reasons. One, it might not be providing the service in a way that the community is happy with it being provided. And the second thing is, it may not be enforcing the regulations that the community wants to be enforced. So these particular objections that we hear today might be unique to this group, but a community objecting that the provider of security is not serving the interests of the community, that is not new in history. In France, the monopoly on security had been overthrown for the second time 1 year prior to that book I've referenced. That was the Revolution of 1848. The book was written in 1849. It also references in the book that, as once happened in England, monopoly for the benefit of one certain class of society was finally replaced by communal production. If there are no police, as is suggested, then we will still have a demand for security. And when there's a demand for security or for any product, then the market will rise up to provide that service and have people competing to provide that service. And they already do this. Just think of all the places. If you go to a hotel casino in Las Vegas, you'll see private security there. If you look at a fancy private school, you're likely to see private security there. and consider that insurance companies hire private investigators to recover stolen goods because they're much more effective than the state is at recovering those goods. So what's wrong with the security business competing with each other to get a contract to provide a satisfactory service to the community? But I can hear you say, what about communities who can't afford it? Well, since we're a wealthy society, we collectively decide that everyone should have access to basic things. So for example, based on income, we provide food stamps, supplemental nutrition assistance program. And in this program, the government gives money to people who need the money. And when people get that money, they take it to private businesses that are competing with each other to provide food for people. We could do the same thing for security. And in this way, the community would choose the security provider who would be most satisfactory to the community. So in a way, this is also a great check on the federal government, where the federal government says drugs are not legal, but we see now lots of states say we are not going to prosecute these laws. We are going to legalize it on the state level, but on the federal level, it's still illegal. So I'm not that interested in marijuana, but I am also not that interested in paying for the police force to stop adults from consuming it. Okay, so we could also consider lots of other rules that communities might not be that interested in paying this security force to enforce. Maybe gun laws, maybe minimum wage. We could go on and just purely speculate. And so I mention this because, of course, this is a threat to the state. Even if the consumers are satisfied, the state is losing control, and the state's unable to enforce the laws that the state wants to enforce in the interest of the state, not in the interest of the community. Think of all the special interest groups that lobby government to get laws in place. I can understand the government would not look favorably upon this development of a private police force. So I've been hiding the ball a little bit because I didn't want to label these ideas, but the only people that I'm aware of who have advocated these ideas have historically been devotees of the libertarian and anarcho-capitalist political and economic philosophies. But I would say, forget about whatever label you might put on it. The ideas should stand on their own. For all ideas, they should stand on their own. And whatever scary thing you might think about these labels, this school of thought fundamentally emphasizes mutual, voluntary exchange and is generally fundamentally against the initiation of the use of force, typically called the non-aggression principle, or the NAP. So if you're wondering where these people live on the political spectrum, it's best to show the Nolan chart. And in the Nolan chart, instead of a single axis right and left, there's a double axis. Nolan reasoned that virtually all human political activity can be divided into two broad categories, economic and personal. And so we see that we've got left and right. So at 9 o'clock, we've got liberal. At the 3 o'clock, we have conservative. 12 o'clock, we have libertarian. And 6 o'clock, we have authoritarian. In conclusion, the production of security should, in the interests of the consumers of this intangible commodity, be subject to free competition. Okay, so what do I think about all this? Here are the problems that I can foresee. What happens when your new security service becomes abusive? Who regulates them? Who keeps them in check? If the community is just trading their state police for the federal police, that may not necessarily be what they're looking for. I have to also observe that for all the consideration that's gone into this idea, I'm not aware of any civilization in the last 150 years that's made something like this work. The state loses too much power and they have their own interests. So I'm sure that's a big reason for that. Also, I haven't even discussed what a transition would look like, which would be totally messy. State government versus federal government is also a mess. And the current phrase is to defund the police. To say privatize the police, which is really what I've been saying, right? Because even if the idea is we will have no police, out of that will come some private security service. Privatize the police sounds too much like a conservative idea, so I don't expect that a left-leaning group will adopt this kind of slogan or even the idea necessarily. I also have some concerns about organized crime. This is not a statement on race because pretty much all races are represented in organized crime, but I could imagine that organized crime could offer to provide security to a community for free in exchange for allowing nonviolent criminal activities in the area, and I don't think that's necessarily such a great outcome either. But again, this is really a question of what are the laws that the community wants to have enforced in their own community. That's a quick overview. Let me know what you think. Please leave a comment and let me know. Please subscribe, and thanks for watching.